Hi, Dave here once again. Let's upgrade this laptop's RAM. This is the same Toshiba Satellite E45 laptop that I've worked on in previous videos, and I already upgraded the hard drive to an SSD, to a solid-state drive in a previous video. Now I'll upgrade the RAM as well. Currently, the laptop has 6 gigabytes of DDR3L1600 RAM. A 2 gigabyte stick and a 4 gigabyte stick. I'm going to replace these with 2 8 gigabyte sticks of high performance RAM, bringing it to the maximum of 16 gig. That's the max that this laptop can do. Now, this RAM automatically overclocks up to 2133 megahertz when needed. So we'll see how it does. I'm hoping for a performance boost from this in addition to the solid-state drive that I'm putting in, or have put in already. Okay, so ramming speed. That's what we're looking for here. And so let's go through the removal. Now, a couple things. Before I do any work on laptops, I like to do a couple things. First, I power it down, and then disconnect the battery. And then I like to press and hold the power button for about 30 seconds to discharge the motherboard. And then, of course, implement ESD prevention. Got to have that anti-static strap and mat and so on all set up so that we can try to prevent any damage to our computer and our devices and circuit boards. Okay, so let's go through the removal of these. Removal is pretty easy. I mean, if you have a nice setup, a well-lit, good environment to work in, and you've done your planning and you've gotten the correct RAM for the laptop, the actual job doesn't take all that long to do. It's all about the planning and the preparation, right? So what we have here is we have a couple of sticky protectors that are on top of the RAM. So I'm going to take these off. And really, these just kind of stick on. So I'm going to put these face up and hold on to these for later, because it's a good way of protecting the circuit board of the RAM from the cover of the laptop. So I'm going to hold on to those. And we'll take this second one off. Okay. And I did that without touching any of the actual circuits there. Then we want to remove the RAM. Now these are SO-DIMMs. And by the way, you want to know your SO-DIMM types for the exams. You really want to know these for the field too. The differences between the different types of DDR SO-DIMMs, and really it's the pins that you're interested in, and those are shown here. And you want to make sure that you purchase or use the correct type of RAM when you're installing the new stuff, right? So removing these is fairly simple. There's 2 ears, these clips here, that we will pull back and away from the RAM module to remove it. So we'll do that now with this first one. And you can use a tool if you want also. I'm just going to use my hands for this. I'm going to pull these back in one motion. Pull them both back, and the RAM module pulled up a little bit to about a 45-degree angle. And then we can remove that. Grab it from each end. Let's see if I can show this better. Grab it from each end and pull out evenly. Try to pull out evenly at the same time so that there's no wiggle. You don't want it to wiggle this way, and we don't want to damage the copper contacts or the slot itself. Okay, so there's slot A, and I believe that one is the 4 gig. So we want to take this and we'll put it in an anti-static bag, or you could put it in a RAM container, because I want to hold on to those just in case the new RAM doesn't really work out. All right, and we'll pop out the second one. Again, you can use trim sticks or something like that to do that, or pry sticks, whatever you like. Usually it's okay to use your hands. And so here's our other stick of RAM. Put that module away. 2 different types. So that's pretty easy. Now, one of the things you might want to do is you want to take a look in here and see if there's any dust bunnies or dirt in the slots. And if necessary, blow out those slots with some compressed air. These are pretty clean, so we don't necessarily need to do that. And let's zoom in a little bit here for the install of the new stuff. And we'll go ahead and put the new RAM in. And you want to be real careful with this RAM when you're handling it. Make sure that you're handling by the edges. And you want to find the notch for this. Hold it by the edges. You don't want to touch any of the circuitry or the board or the copper contacts on here. And you want to find the notch. There's a notch here on slot B and a notch here on slot A. So they're going to go in differently. And so I'll put in slot B first because it's farther away from me. And we're going to put this in again at a 45-degree angle. Match it up. Place it in evenly at the same time. And then we're going to press down with even pressure with our thumbs on the edge of the RAM module until it clicks into place. Okay. We'll grab the other one here. Okay, trying to be very gentle with this and holding from the edges. This one's going to go in the other direction. This one actually goes in upside down, if you want to call it that. Just match the notch with the RAM module. And again, make sure it's fully inserted. That's something with SODIMMs, by the way. I see that a lot with people where it's not fully inserted into the slot. And you can see a little bit of copper contacts here. We've got a real close-up on this. But sometimes with SODIMMs on laptops and on NAS boxes, you'll get an issue where it just doesn't recognize the RAM, and it's just because it's not seated enough. So you always want to check that. So press it in, and then straight down, even pressure until it snaps into place. I believe that the amount of copper circuits we see here is normal. So again, of course, we'll check it, but one is upside down. And that's it. I mean, it's that easy to install these. That's how simple it is to install this type of RAM. So the actual job doesn't take that long. And then we can use the little stickers, the sticky paper here, to protect it. You'll see the sticky side. We want to make sure that that goes on the frame there. And we want to be careful not to touch anything or have that sticky side touch the actual RAM. And we'll do that for the other one here. Excellent. It's like it was never there. Okay, so that's it. That's the RAM install. So the installation is complete. Now it's time to check if the BIOS/UEFI sees the RAM and also the new hard drive that I put in a previous video. And I'll leave the case of the laptop unscrewed until I'm sure that everything is working properly. So we'll take a look at the BIOS now. Okay, so I went into the BIOS by pressing F2, and that brought us to the BIOS setup utility. And we can see here that it all looks good. The hard drive was recognized. We see the new solid state drive. That's a 250 gig drive. And it sees the 16 gig RAM. It shows total memory size as 16,384 megabytes. That's 16 gigabytes. Now, if you're working on a laptop and it's been sitting for a while, you might encounter a battery that was discharged because it's been sitting for so long. And if that's the case, the time and date might get reset to something like January 1st, 2014 or something like that. You may want to consider charging the battery before you actually do anything else, because that could lead to other issues down the road. But we have this set properly here. And so we always want to check the hard drive and the RAM upgrade in the BIOS or UEFI first before you do anything else. And so also you want to make sure before you start an installation of an operating system that everything is configured properly. So I'm going to go to Advanced and go over to Change Boot Order. And what you want is to have USB first and the hard drive second. In this case, especially for this laptop, because it doesn't have an optical drive, it just has USB, and that's what I'm going to install Windows from. I'm going to install Windows 10 Pro from a USB flash drive that I've created with the Windows 10 ISO file and using the program Rufus to help make that into a bootable USB. So you want to check that first, and when the install is done, change it back to hard drive first for security purposes. Okay, so we want to make sure USB is first before we start that install. And you might have to go to the system configuration as well. And if we look here, we have UEFI boot, which is generally what we want to boot the system and to boot to things like Windows 10. But if you're going to install other things like Linux, then you may need to select CSM boot to actually be able to boot off of that USB flash drive, especially if an operating system already exists. So a couple settings that you want to look at, but most importantly, that change boot order. Okay, so once the BIOS sees it and the BIOS is all configured and we've charged the battery and we've got the time and date set, we can go and install the operating system. I'm going to go and do that now, and then I'll be back to take a look at the at how well the laptop is running, and I'll compare it to the other system, which is very similar, and we'll do a little bit of benchmarking. So be back in just a bit. All right, so we have both laptops set up here, and here we have the one that I just upgraded, and here we have a duplicate of it with the original equipment. And just in booting it up, booting up both of the laptops, the upgraded one is like 100 times faster. This one is extremely slow. They're both running Windows 10 Pro. And it shows you how powerful newer versions of operating systems can be, especially versions of Windows, where this system would still be good with something like Ubuntu Linux. And in fact, I run Kali Linux on this computer. Windows 10 Pro is just too much for it. But with the upgraded SSD and the RAM for this computer, it really runs fine. It boots pretty fast. So let's take a look at that system. And you can see here I'm in Windows Explorer. I did the installation of Windows 10 Pro off of a USB 3.0 flash drive on a USB 3.0 port to the SSD, and installed very fast. Installation took about, I don't know, 6-7 minutes total. So here we have C drive. That's where Windows is installed, and I usually like to create a separate data drive, which we had to do in disk management, and format that there. And so got to make sure that you have a separate partition for data. That's a good idea if you just have one drive in a system. This way it keeps the operating system and applications separate from the data. And that can make things a lot easier for you in the long run, especially if you have to troubleshoot the system later. Okay, we saw the RAM and the hard drive in the BIOS, but of course you want to check that. We just saw the hard drive in the operating system, but you want to make sure that you do indeed have the RAM, and we do have 16 gig here. Okay, now taking a look at the device manager, this had some open items in other devices. And if you ever see that, you want to clean it up and make sure you install the necessary drivers. And in fact, there was a couple of PCI devices listed that it didn't know the driver for. And one of them happened to be the ability to project the screen. And it was that HDMI port. The driver was not working for that. And in fact, Windows would say, hey, you can't project the screen. And I need to do that so I can record this video, right? But in general, you want to have a clean device manager. No open items, nothing open that says other devices where the driver hasn't been installed. So I went to Toshiba's site and went to get the drivers for this satellite E45 B4100. That's the type. And what it needed was the latest Toshiba system driver. Okay, and you want to make sure you grab the one with the latest date. And that Toshiba system driver file installed all of the unknowns. In some cases, you may want to get other drivers like wireless or video or what have you. So, keep in mind that you want to go and update those drivers from the manufacturer, from the source. So then I downloaded some benchmarking software that I use quite often. And the first here is Crystal Disk Mark. And you can see it did fairly well. We had 547 megabytes sequential read and 524 sequential write, which is pretty good. And it's that first number that I go by most of the time. That is essentially the same as my Core i7 workstation. It basically has the same drive, but it's a Core i7 workstation with a lot of fast DDR4 RAM. But it basically gets the same numbers. So that's definitely cool. If we switch over to the other computer, let's switch over to that now. This thing can't even run Crystal Disk Mark. It's stuck. It's stuck at 95 megabyte per second. That's how bad Windows can run on some older laptops. And these aren't really that old. And the drive is okay. It runs other operating systems like Linux fine. And the drive tests okay, except when you run a program like this. But the difference generally between magnetic drives, like the one that this system has, and the SSD that I installed, it's usually, you might see as much as 100% performance increase in the SSD. So I'll go back to the upgraded laptop. And we also did a Passmark benchmark. The total rating, not that great, and that's because of the CPU and the graphics that are in this guy. And by the way, with some of these laptops, you can upgrade the video card. This could be set up as a mini PCIe, or it could be an M.2, and you can do an upgrade for those on some of these. So that's a possibility to get that rating higher and to play games or do whatever. It depends on the laptop. It may or may not be upgradable. But what I upgraded was the disk, and you can see here we're at the 5200, 93rd percentile, which is very good, and the memory up at the 66th percentile, which is pretty good. And so I have done this previously with an older version of Windows, and this is probably 100% better as far as the memory and the disk goes, as far as the Passmark rating. A much higher score on this. So I'm definitely enthused about the performance upgrade, just usability and booting up speed and doing everything I need to do. It reacts very quickly, very efficiently. And that's what we wanted. That was the whole point. That was why we upgraded this hard drive and the RAM on this. So definitely worth it. And so that's pretty much it for this video. We upgraded the solid state drive, we upgraded the RAM, and we did some tests, and we know that this is now working well. I'm going to continue to use this system as a Kali Linux box, but you never know. Maybe I'll upgrade the SSD on here, and I could use some of the older RAM and bring this guy from 6 to 8, actually. So there's some options there with the older RAM that I just took out of this one. So, you know, when you're working with different laptops at the organization or at the company, you might have this type of scenario where you have a lot of extra parts. So you want to make sure you label them and keep them well documented as you're going through your travels. So there it is, memory upgrade, and this laptop is now ready to go. And that's it for this video.